Okay, good. Okay, so we'll start off with our first presentation with Tomas Ruairc. I see Tomas there. Welcome, Tomas.
Afternoon, Bernadette. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all.
Lovely to see you. Tomas, we had a few areas of discussion that were posed to you that maybe you would like to maybe just start off with a couple of ideas and thoughts on the journey that we've been on as a system in education over the past 10 years in terms of research in teaching and learning. And maybe just start off with that broad area and maybe you could contribute your thoughts on that, and then we'll all share in that conversation together.
That'd be great, Bernadette. And look, if I go on too long at any stage, just please do intervene quite bluntly if needs be, and haul me back. Because the journey of the last 10 years obviously starts around 2013, and I think in particular the Salberg report, which made a very important policy choice that is not common in international context, that teacher education at some expense, to the state and at some cost of time to the learner in terms of the student teacher, would be vested in university context. So with a very clear, and it would be research informed. So those two key principles of university based and research informed were very clearly put forth in the adoption of the Salberg recommendations by the department around 2011, 2012. So 10 years ago, those reforms on top of the Teaching Council's own criterion guidance for ITE were really beginning to kick off. To segue slightly, of course, and I've known from my time at the Teaching Council, in some respects, of course, this will simply acknowledge what teachers have been doing for decades in terms of formal postgraduate research. So I think it's important to remind ourselves in this 10-year time frame that it wasn't coming out of the blue, so to speak, and that I think for the last 10 years, in terms of how the journey has gone, we've been trying more and more, so my 10 years in the council and I'm in the Department of Education, to really enhance connections between that which is already there. So, and I think the action research piece is a key node, if I can put it like that, between what has been happening for decades in terms of teacher postgraduate research, with a more formal postgraduate research, and the greater responsiveness to children's needs that have been becoming an increasing focus of policy, not just in education, but more broadly. And I think I attended a Dean's lecture in DCU a couple of weeks ago. There's a professor from Australia talking about how, in contrast to our own system, a lot of resetting of the policy reform space. So I think we've been quite fortunate. I'm sure there are people in this call who might challenge this, what I'm about to say, but I would submit that we've been fortunate that while there have been lots of changes in the teacher education policy space, there hasn't been a fundamental reset. So in other words, it's been continuing the journey. So the literacy and numeracy strategy, the Salberg report, the criterion guidelines of the Teaching Council, the induction program of DRIHID was an update and a review of the standards previously put in place, for example. And CUSON was completing the continuum from a teacher education, Teaching Council regulation point of view. So that 10 years on, we have, I would submit, the pillars, the core blocks of a rich ecosystem of teaching, learning, and research through your CAME standards, DRIHID for the induction, CUSON in teachers' professional learning. And then more recently, the publication of the ITE policy statement only this week by the minister, I think really puts a capstone on all of that, if I can put it like that. So that over those 10 years, we've been progressing within a fairly consistent framework, with increasing emphasis and acknowledgement of the research piece. What's been quite interesting on top of all of that, of course, many people in this call have been central to this, has been the NEARIMeet phenomenon, for example, that kind of sprung up. I always remember going to the first one and sprung up so organically and came into the system through teachers on the ground. And I see Mary raising her hand there and all the rest. So I think but I think it's really kind of a good acknowledgement, celebration of that. And that came into that ecosystem, if you like. And with a very explicit, sometimes nuance can trip us up. So a very explicit kind of focus on teachers in classrooms in what might be regarded as bite-sized kind of engagement, but really impactful. And if we accept, therefore, that the postgraduate formal space has been happening for so long, creating this rich soil from which we can grow, the action research is really helping to germinate and kind of flower that space in that context. Because it's all part of the one ecosystem. So that kind of understandable. I remember asking a teacher with a PhD level qualification, asking to summarize it in one page for a meeting I was going to, and they were aghast. And I said, I'm really sorry, I said, but I need to get the key insights. And I understand there's, 4 years of working into that doctorate, but for where I am right now, I need you to help work with me on this and cross boundaries in Wenger sense of the word, if you like, and help us. We were both boundary crosses in that context, I would think. So I think that journey we've been on is whereby there's been a framework put in place, pillars to support the roof of that framework, that space, if you like. And now we're kind of really building the connections in almost mycelial ways between those pillars and more broadly, so that that great corpus of knowledge and insight that the teaching profession as a whole would have is going to land in practical ways in the classroom, because the same teachers who have committed so much time and energy to the former, let's say, postgraduate space historically, are the very same ones in the classroom struggling with the pressures of daily life in the classroom. And they themselves won't be able to open their own thesis to respond to children's needs. They need ways of mediating that. So you look at, for example, what the Teaching Council itself would have done in the Cree Research Library space, and put a lot of things in place, like the research engagement group of practicing teachers, the research newsletter, and so on. And I think where we're at right now, and I'll pause now because I'm conscious of going on, is that it's really not providing more stuff, but more making really good use of what we have. And I think the key elements are there for all of that.
Thanks, Tomas. Would anyone like to offer some thoughts or respond to what Tomas has said there with regards to where we are now at in terms of teaching, learning and research over the past number of years? I think one of the things, Tomas, that you mentioned here was that you felt that there's a need for maybe a reset, or that we need to build on where we are at now in terms of what's happening. And I suppose my question to you and my thoughts on this is that, yes, there's formal pathways in developing research and having opportunities for teachers to engage in meaningful research, but how can we grow that so that there's accessibility for teachers? Because I think there is, I suppose, a disconnect in a way, that there are obviously a significant number of teachers doing great work, and it's that acknowledgement of that good work that they're doing and their ability to identify it as, good practice and to be able to celebrate that work. And I know we do have that Féilte celebration every year in Ireland and so on, and the Teach Meets are good with that. But I suppose there is an opportunity to have more I suppose pathway or accessibility for teachers to acknowledge and for each other to recognize the good practice that they're doing and research in schools that they're doing that may not be recognized.
Oh, that's a very fair point, Bernadette. And so just to be absolutely clear, I'm not arguing for a reset, quite the opposite, actually, in terms of the policy space. But I still take the point on the question. And I'm really curious about this, because I'm aware at a superficial level of network theory, which goes back to at least the 70s. Garno Vetter, I think, was the guy who wrote a piece on the power of weak ties. So I'm curious, I don't have an answer on this particular point as to how do people actually get their information currently? How do we chart their current pathways, for better or for worse, whether it's social media, whether it's unreliable, however, but how are they currently reading and receiving information, so that we might actually plug into those existing channels and really embed the rich research and insights we have. I'm aware, from since the 90s, from a podcast I listened to recently, that biomimicry is an area, for example, that has been growing increasing importance, acknowledgement of, essentially in plainer English, observing the natural world and what does it teach us about how things connect and grow in a sustainable way, and different domains looking at that, and what might an observation of our system in terms of how teachers currently exchange information and so on work in that way. So I have a really open mind about this. I would very much welcome other people's thoughts and insights on that particular, maybe those questions, because I'm really hungry for real growth and impact in terms of how people connect, and to really keep the eye on that prize. But you are right, there are current spaces like Féilte and so on, and I think the piece around the acknowledgement, with at the same time keeping the eye on impact for the child in the classroom, could look at, we have so much space and time around us and we don't realize it. So like schools have much greater agency than sometimes think. And what might a celebration acknowledgement of research done by teachers in their own staff room look and sound like? How might, and I've seen schools, post-primary schools, using Croke Park hours, which I know have not the greatest reputation, but they make good use of them to do a mini Féilte focused on research. And they bring in students, they bring in parents, they bring in feeder primary schools. It's rapid fire, very much like the Teach Me format, but it's the teachers from the school showcasing their own research. And because, of course, they're practicing teachers in that environment, they know the lingo of how to translate their academic level of language into a practitioner, maybe into a practitioner space, without being in a pejorative in either context there. So we know schools who are doing this. How can we share that more widely? That might be the regional context. Education centres, I think, are one of the most undersold and aspects of our education system in Ireland. They're a real meso level partner, and they do a lot of good work in this space. But what could we do? Could we actually augment that further? And at the national, I think you're right in terms of Fáilte, but I think that is ripe for growth too. It's 10 years old this year. And I think we do more in terms of really, you've got teachers giving up their time at this point, for the last number of years to come and share innovation in an exciting way. To the Wrong Bianca space some years ago and so on, there was a further progress made in stitching the research piece in a really innovative and accessible way, and we do more there. So I think it's a bit like Oliver Burkeman said some years ago in The Guardian: if you find yourself facing intractable problems in your life, sometimes all you do is look at things you're doing now, and if you took one of them and did them a bit more, you might make further progress. That we often despair unnecessarily when we are doing something good, maybe not enough, but we are doing something good, and could we augment that further? I think there's lots. I think there's two halves to the story, Bernadette. One is maintaining an open mind as to how people really connect and network, and how do we build on that without kind of foisting our own preordained ideas, so to speak. But the other one is almost paradoxically looking at the good things we're doing and what can we do, how can we do them more.